What is going on, everybody? This is Clint here with the Die Hard MMA Podcast and Odds.com. It is time for the post-weigh-in recap, the best show of the week when it comes to MMA betting information. And we've got a good one this week, UFC Fight Island 5. So if you're new to the show, what we do is I sit back, I watch the weigh-ins, I watch the face-offs, and then I come to you with every single little read that I've got. Now, some of you may just click on the UFC's little links over on Twitter and check out what these guys look like facing off and make a call from there. What I do is I watch them on the scales. I watch them closely as they get on, as they get off. I will click it back and watch it 3 or 4 times in a row to look for just the slightest little wobble, to look for the body language as they're getting their rehydration bottles from their coaches, and pick up on every little thing that might tell us whether or not they had a bad weight cut and whether or not we have got a spot to make some extra money. So I do all the legwork for you, and I stick it right here in this video for you for free. So do me a favor, hit that like button and share this video out there to any other MMA fans or sports bettors that you might think have some interest. First fight of the night. I always mess that up. First fight on the card, Bruno Silva taking on Taguir Ulambekov. We've got Bruno Silva. He came in at 125.5. Now, I'll be honest, he seemed a little unsteady on the scale. Physically, though, he looked pretty good, but he looked a little red in the face, which is a little unusual for somebody weighing in like that. Maybe he was running right before he jumped on the scales trying to cut those last couple extra pounds, but that was something that I don't see as normal. It's not something I've seen him do before that I can recall. So a little question mark there. Now, Taguir Ulambekov came in at 126. Business as usual for this kid. Absolutely nothing wrong with him. Didn't have any issues. Moved around well. Moved quickly on and off the scale. And then when they faced off, Taguir looks like he's a full 2 weight classes bigger than Bruno Silva. Now, I got into it with somebody in the chat last week, which, of course, all friendly banter, no hard feelings or anything like that. But I've been told before that I put too much emphasis on the size differences between these guys. And the reality is, no, I don't, because a much larger percent of fighters that have a height and a reach advantage tend to win these fights. Now, there are certain matchups, certain circumstances where the smaller fighter is more compact, has better power, can end the fight, that kind of thing. Trust me, it happens. But more often than not, you want to be on the side of the person who is taller and longer. Weight classes exist for a reason because size does matter. And at a certain point, if you can, in a healthy way, cut down an extra weight class, you have an advantage. And that's why these guys try to kill themselves to get down an extra weight class or two, because it does provide an advantage on fight night. And Taguir is far and away the side on this fight. When they faced off, Bruno looked like he was trying to make up some machismo ground, ripped off his shirt trying to get up on Taguir, and it didn't faze the kid whatsoever. This guy's a Russian killer who trains with Khabib out of AKA. I already have a parlay with Taguir, and that's the play, in my opinion. If you don't have Taguir in a parlay, that's the move. Taguir maybe by decision might be the move because he's such a big, strong grappler. I think he'll just overwhelm Bruno Silva or stay on the outside, and Bruno will have a hard time closing the distance to land that big knockout blow that he's going to need to end this fight. I think this is an easy spot for Taguir, but the line definitely reflects that. We've got the only women's fight on the card coming up next. Tracy Cortez taking on Stephanie Egger. Tracy came in at 136. She got a nice little pose and a little bow after she made weight. Seemed very, very muted, I guess you could say. Hard to read. Not a woman that seems like she's out there flamboyant. She's also relatively new, so I don't know a lot about her. Couldn't really pick up on anything, but she looked good. Stephanie Egger, short notice replacement. She made 135.5. She looked good physically speaking. Kind of a blank slate. Maybe a little bit nervous. This is her UFC debut, first time on the big stage, so that would be understandable. When they faced off, Egger was a bit larger than Cortez than I expected. Now, it was a respectful face-off. The women usually are. Not a whole lot of beef or jawing unless there's something, behind the scenes leading up to the fight. The thing that I would say on this one is I feel like my initial read was that Cortez was going to be the side here, be able to use her strength, her grappling. We've seen it before in the cage, and Stephanie coming in with a lot less experience, but apparently she's got a solid judo background that I missed out on, and she actually has competed and maybe has a win over Ronda Rousey in judo, so Egger is no joke. At this point, I would say the best move is a pass. A lot of love has come in on Egger, and I am not going to jump on it at this point. A lot of the line value has been beaten out of Egger. Now she is plus 160. She opened up plus 225. So if you got in on Egger early and you want to roll those dice, go for it. I don't think the read changes. I think Cortez has the better wrestling. If Egger can flip her with her hips and throw her and get onto her back, then she probably is going to win this thing by submission. But if she can't do that, Cortez probably still backs her up, sucks her hips out, and just grapples her and tries to stay safe on top with her wrestling to get a decision. So maybe Egger by submission, maybe Cortez by decision. I'm not laying minus 185 on Cortez. And like I said, I don't want plus 160 on Egger, maybe plus 200, but too late. I'm not going there. Giga Chikadze taking on Omar Moraes. We've got Giga coming in at 146. Looked very lean, looked good. Again, this guy's been doing this a long time, so no surprises there. Omar Moraes, 145.5, started flexing immediately. Now, this is his debut at 145. He's been fighting up a weight class before this, and dude's a stone cold killer. He absolutely looked confident. He looked strong. He looked like he had no issues, didn't get off the scales tenderly or anything like that. He was ready to go. I'm surprised. He looked fantastic down at 145. And when they came into the face-offs, Omar actually jogged and jumped onto the stage. That's not something you do if you've had a rough weight cut. We've seen some of these people before. When they have a hard time dropping or changing weight classes, they're very careful. They're tentative. They take one step at a time. They make sure, because they're just a little bit wobbly on the feet. No, he jumped. This dude's ready to go. He's got energy. He is, in fact, ready for this fight. They sized up extremely well. Giga is big for the weight class, but Omar was right there with him. I think this is going to be a fantastic fight, solid face-off. I'm on Omar Moraes, and I think this is a good spot to fade Giga because Omar is the more well-rounded mixed martial artist. Ali Al-Casey taking on Tony Kelly. This is one of the ones I told you before. I put a pin in this one. I was waiting for this face-off. Ali Al-Casey came in at 136, and he was the last fighter on the scales by a long shot today. It took him almost the entire time allotment to get in there and make weight. And he needed the towel. They immediately walked up on stage with him. They had the towel ready to go because they knew he was over. But he stepped on the scale, and the guy kind of waved him up, looked at it for a half second, moved it over, and shouted 136. I'll be completely honest with you. People talk about rigging. People talk about things being fixed. This one was suspect to me. I'm not one of those people. I think the UFC does a very good job of, these are not rigged fights. This isn't WWE. These people are fighting for their lives and for their financial, for their families. This was suspect to me. It seemed like the guy doing the weigh-ins may have offered him a little bit of a helping hand here because his own team knew he needed to strip down and knew he needed that towel. His face when they read off 136, he was shocked. I think Ali Al-Casey had a very rough weight cut, and I think he got bailed out at weigh-ins today. Tony Kelly came in at 136, but he had no issues whatsoever. He looked extremely confident, in shape, rock and roll. He was locked and loaded, ready to go. When they faced off, I got to tell you guys, again, this is another spot where I've got to go back to the size. Kelly is huge. This is just like Omar Moraes. This is him dropping down for the first time to 135 pounds. We saw him fight at 155. We saw him fight at 145. Now we're seeing him fight at 135. And I expected to bet on Ali Al-Casey. I like how this line has gotten blown up. So it opened up with Al-Casey being just a short plus 130 dog. I like Al-Casey's grappling. I like what he can do on the mat. But it's been nothing but love for Tony Kelly. And now that line is all the way up to plus 185. Bookmakers don't make massive mistakes like this very often. So for my money, I'm thinking that dog has some serious value after moving 50 cents. We've got a big dog that can wrestle, that can grapple, and a guy making his first weight cut down to a new weight class. If that cut doesn't go well, if his gas tank runs out, Ali Al-Casey's going to feel far more comfortable there because he's been there before. He's fought there for some time. I was really ready to go on Al-Casey. However, Al-Casey looked bad to me, and Kelly looked really good to me. This is going to be a pass. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to take on this one, and this is one where if I had my little time travel machine, if I could go back to the beginning of the week, and when this line came out at minus 160, and that early money came in on Al-Casey, and I could have gotten Tony Kelly at minus 145 or minus 150, I would have bet Tony Kelly if I had the information that I have now. He looked huge. He definitely is a different weight class. It was a good face-off. And Kelly was talking. He's ready to go for this fight. And neither man wanted to back down. This is going to be an intense fight. This is going to be a scrap. I am ready to watch this one. But unfortunately, because the way the line has moved, it's going to be fireball and popcorn for me. I'm going to have to sit back and enjoy. I'm not going to place a bet on this fight. But honestly, at this point, I'm in the Tony Kelly camp. I wouldn't be surprised if he finds a way to put Al-Casey away in this one. Impa Kasanganay taking on Joaquin Buckley. Impa came in at 185.5, and he took his good sweet time getting to the scale. This is one that I was kind of, come on, man. Like, he took forever to get up there. Very slow, gingerly stepped on and off the scale, seemed very reserved. Now, this guy is built like a brick shit house. He's got abs for days. One of these just physical specimens in the UFC. And it looks to me almost like maybe he had a tough cut, because I don't think I've seen him quite that reserved before. Now, Impa is a relatively calm individual. He doesn't get overly hyped up, at least until he's in the cage. And he's a very intelligent person. So that speaks to that kind of low level, low volume. Like, he doesn't get overly up or overly down. But this did seem a little down to me. It makes me a little bit suspicious. Joaquin Buckley came in at 185.5, absolutely jacked. This dude is excited. He's ready to go. He literally jumped on the scale, and the thing was like doing this because he landed on it. They had to wait for it to settle down before they could actually get his weight on. When they faced off, Impa's a little bit taller. Buckley's a little bit thicker. It was a good face-off. This is going to be a great fight, a great matchup in my opinion. What I ended up doing, I wanted to take the dog here. I really wanted to get on Joaquin Buckley. I think he's been undersold a little bit. I'm not quite sold on Impa yet. He's fought a couple of guys, okay guys, but I think he's got a lot of room to improve. Obviously, he's got a very high ceiling. The world is this kid's oyster, but I don't think he's there quite yet. So I wanted to take the opportunity to fade him with Buckley getting plus 200, plus 210, plus 215. However, I think I found a better angle. I'm going on the under. I talked about this on Total Madness. So Joaquin Buckley, he's coming off of a bad knockout loss in his last fight. That was just a little over a month ago. I like to see people take 90 days at the minimum to recover. 6 months, 9 months. You want people to have a long time to let their brains rest and recover after getting knocked out badly. He was knocked out essentially twice in the same fight against Kevin Holland. Now he's coming in here against Impa, and I think Impa is looking for his first finish. The stuff he was landing on Maki Pitolo, Maki's just incredibly durable. Impa could put people away, he just hasn't quite yet. Now Buckley has that fast twitch, explosive muscle power. He can knock out pretty much anybody, and especially if Impa had a bad weight cut, he could knock this guy out too. I think that both these guys may be slightly compromised. Both these guys are explosive and athletic and fast. They hit hard. I hope somebody's going to sleep. I took the under 2.5. It's a plus line. I think I got plus 168 for the under 2.5. So for me, I can still cheer for Buckley just so I sound super smart and I'm not the guy that laid the wood with Impa Kasanganay like everybody else did. But hey, if Impa wins, as long as it's before 2 minutes and 30 seconds of the third round, I'll take it. Next up, we've got Chris Daukaus taking on Rodrigo Nacimento. Heavyweight time. I'm excited about this one. The weird thing about this one, though, has me a little uncomfortable. Chris Daukaus came in at 227. That is very, very light for a heavyweight. Very small. Now, we saw him the last couple of times out, and this is a big, husky dude. I mean, he was carrying a lot of mass on him. However, he's been working very, very hard on his strength and conditioning. I talked about that in the podcast earlier in the week. I didn't expect it to be this much, though, because he came in and he was losing a lot of that extra weight. He looked good on the scales, and honestly, I think his future is at 205. If he's getting down to 227 fighting heavyweights, there's no need for him to fight these big boys. He can cut another 20 pounds or so, and he'll be able to get down to 205, no problem. I think he'll have a future there. Rodrigo Nacimento came in and tipping the scales, 265. This is a big man, and he doesn't have quite so much of the flabby build. He's a little more muscular for a big guy. So there is a difference there in their body types. Now, they faced off really well. Daukaus is not smaller than Rodrigo Nacimento. However, Nacimento has that heavyweight thickness. He's got the broad shoulders. He's got the broad chest. He's got that build. This man is a true heavyweight. So I do think these guys maybe belong in different weight classes, and that has me a little concerned. I did pull the trigger on Chris Daukaus. I got plus 240 on him. I don't mind that bet at this point. He's still sitting right around plus 220, I think, but the money is starting to come in on Daukaus a little bit. I think he's going to have a speed advantage. He's got a boxing advantage. He's got better cardio. When this fight hits the mat, Daukaus is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. However, that size of Nacimento may prove to be a problem. He's very dangerous on the mat, and with him being the bigger, potentially stronger man, that could spell trouble. So if Chris Daukaus can keep this thing on the feet or find his way back to the feet after he gets taken down, if he can have the energy to survive in round 1 and get to round 2 when maybe Nacimento starts to slow a little bit and he can turn it up, I think we're still very live here. However, I am a little bit concerned at the weight difference. Tom Breeze taking on KB Buller. Tom Breeze came in at 186, looks absolutely jacked. And physically speaking, he looked ready to go. That's about all I've got to offer. He got on the scales pretty quickly. He got off the scales pretty fast. Tom Breeze is the guy we've talked about having those mental hurdles before, and that's some of the reason why I wanted to fade him here. But I didn't really catch any wind of that. Didn't have time to. So maybe he has those nerves and we just can't tell. We don't really know. KB Buller came in at 186. He's making his UFC debut. He looked extremely intense on the scale. This guy was locked in. No flex, just kind of stared down the cameraman. When he got off the scale, he moved extremely well. So sometimes when you see people do that, it's a sign of a bad weight cut. They don't want to waste the energy. They don't want to wobble. They just don't want to move. Not in this case. He got off. He moved fine. He moved well. This kid is energetic. I think he's just ready to go for the fight, honestly. I think he's one of these flip-the-switch fighters where he's a nice guy outside the cage. He's a great guy in interviews. He's a complete nerd. He plays Pokemon. I love the guy. But then when it's time to go, he goes. That's kind of the feeling I'm getting from KB Buller. When they faced off, Buller's bigger. We talked about this in the podcast that I think Buller is a very big 185er, and Breeze has a history of fighting at 170. I am tempted to pull the trigger on KB Buller here. Buller's sitting around plus 225 at this point, and I think that's just too wide, especially because we know that Breeze has some heart issues. If he gets into a war here, if he gets into a battle, the younger, fresher fighter is probably going to be the one who's more ready to go, more willing to trade, willing to put his life on the line to make his mark in the UFC. We've seen Breeze essentially struggle and quit before. I'm very tempted. Keep an eye out on my Twitter, at Die Hard MMA Pod. I might be pulling the trigger on KB Buller. It's a bit of a blind gamble because he is unproven. He was supposed to be fighting on the Contender Series. Now he's jumping straight into the UFC. But I feel like this is potentially a pretty good matchup for him. And the fact that he is going to have the size, the height, the reach advantage, possibly the strength advantage, more than likely the strength advantage based on how big they are. I don't think Buller's a bad spot at plus 225. Youssef Zalal taking on Ilia Topuria. Zalal came in at 146. This dude is always happy, always smiling. He starts shouting out to the lady running the weigh-in, says hi to her, looks really good physically on the scales, never has issues making weight. I love this kid. Ilia Topuria came in at 146. Dude's a little monster. He's a little shorter, but he is thick, he is ripped, he is well-muscled, and he seemed extremely confident. When they faced off, both guys were energetic. Both guys were happy. It was a good face-off. This is very much a competitor's spot where both these guys want to beat each other. They want to take each other's heads off, but there's no ill will, no ill intent. And both guys seem very confident in their skill set. This is one I want to talk about real quick because if you watched the Die Hard MMA podcast, I have a parlay. I had Taguir parlayed with Youssef Zalal. That came out to just slight chalk, I think minus 105 or something like that. I did 2 units on that. So I was risking, I think, 2.12 units to win 2. And what I've decided to do in this case is I actually hedged off. The line has gotten wide enough that this kid Topuria was sitting at about plus 165. I put a unit on Topuria to hedge that parlay. So essentially, if Zalal wins, I do still think he wins. He's a proven UFC prospect. I like his style. I like what he does. If he wins, I'm going to win 1 unit instead of winning 2. Because I put that unit on Topuria and it will lose. Now on the flip side of that, because I bet that unit on Topuria, should he pull the win off, should he be able to take out Youssef Zalal in his UFC debut and continue his undefeated run, I'm going to win 1.6 units. So rather than losing 2.2 units on the parlay, I'm only going to lose about a half unit. I think 0.47 is the exact math that it would come to. So I think it's a good little hedge spot, and I feel a whole lot more comfortable here because I want to be on the Zalal, but everything I've seen from Topuria tells me this kid is legit. And I realized I don't want to have a 2-unit bet going against a kid that's this caliber, this level, this hungry, undefeated. And he's got the size that has caused Youssef Zalal some problems in the past. Like I said, I do still think Zalal wins, but if you've tailed me, if you've gone on the parlay, if you've gone heavy on Zalal, I would say maybe hedge off a little bit. Hedge off a little bit, put a little money on Topuria because he's still sitting around plus 150 right now, and you can get some of that back and have a nice little middle spot where you're not quite as exposed on what I'm starting to believe is going to be a very, very dangerous fight. Markus Perez taking on Dricus du Plessis, and I believe it's Duplessis, not Duplessis. That's what the announcer was saying at the weigh-ins, so I'm going to go with that. Markus Perez came in at 186. Big flex, dude's pumped up, pounds his chest, roars at the camera. Love this guy. He's such a character. I absolutely love him. He started rehydrating before he got his pants on. Now, I talked a couple of weeks ago about the city kickboxing fight. If you recall, part of the reason that I wanted to fade Kai Kara France was because as soon as he stepped off the scale, he started chugging. To me, that's a sign of a rough weight cut, the need for hydration. You've got to get it in you immediately. Most people will at least get off the stage before they start taking a drink. That was an urgent, I need water in my system. Markus Perez kind of started to do the same thing here. However, this is a little bit different. He was starting to take a drink while he was putting his pants on, literally almost fell over while he was getting the pants on. His body language on and off the scale, I don't think that it was that important. I don't think it was that urgent. This guy's just a goofball, and that's more the read that I take there. So before anybody jumps at me and says that I'm, picking sides and picking and choosing when the read makes sense, this guy's just goofy. So I don't think that was an urgent necessity like Kai Kara France was. I'm sure he's a big dude. He cuts weight. He needed that rehydration, but not quite the same situation. Dricus came in at 186. Extremely well built. This guy's got so much muscle on him. It's ridiculous. Big smile, moved well. I think he's ready for his debut here. When they got to the face-offs, this was the best face-off of the day here. Markus Perez went full Joker. I love that this guy does this. He's got the best impersonation of the Joker I have ever seen. And Dricus got up in his face. I think Markus Perez is winning the mental warfare here because he pulled down the mask. He started doing the Joker lip smack thing at him. And Dricus did not look like he appreciated the antics. But Perez was talking to him. He was smiling. He was laughing. They had to get split up because Dricus refused to back off of that face-off. And Markus Perez was just enjoying himself. Now, this is another spot I was really waiting for the weigh-ins to see before I made my move. I said that if Markus Perez got up to plus 150, that's when I would be really interested in taking the shot on him as a dog here. I think it's a little disrespectful having someone like Dricus come into the UFC for his debut and be this big of a favorite, especially against a guy who's battle-tested against UFC caliber opposition like Perez. However, now that I've seen them face off, I'm concerned that Dricus is exactly the kind of guy that's going to give Markus Perez problems. Now, Dricus has never been to the judges' scorecards. He finishes every single fight or he gets finished in return. This is a 3-round fight. Perez is the kind of guy who has trouble finishing people in the UFC. He's got a 6 submission game on him, but we haven't seen it so far in the cage. He has a bunch of submission wins outside of the octagon, but not very many inside the UFC's octagon. And Dricus is a great grappler, so I don't know that Perez is going to be able to submit Dricus. Now, Perez is defensively solid on the feet. He's got a hell of a chin on him. He's hard to finish. And he's good enough with his submission game that I don't think he's going to get finished on the mat. So what this kind of reads to me is Dricus is going to be live in this spot, but I think this fight is going to the judges' scorecards. What I am tempted to do here on this one, once again, you'll have to follow me over at Die Hard MMA Pod on Twitter. I'm tempted to take a look at the over 2.5. It's plus 110, plus 105 right now. And I think that's a half-decent spot here, getting plus money, because, like I said, Perez simply is so hard to finish. I think he'll be able to stay safe. I think he'll be able to survive. And then if he does manage to win, I mean, at least we cash our bet that way, right? But the other option that you could do is you could take a look at Dricus Duplessis. I'm sorry, I've totally lost the pronunciation. You could look at Dricus by decision. And shout out to the boys over at the Dog or Pass podcast. My boy Cody Saftik does his work over there with Paul Shaughnessy. And shout out specifically to Paul Shaughnessy because he's rolling the dice on Dricus plus 330 by decision. And I don't think that's a bad bet. I don't know that I'll make that bet myself, but I don't think that's a bad bet. Because if he comes in here, he's going to look like the bigger, physically stronger man. But I think on the feet, he's going to have a hard time catching Perez. We are in the big octagon. And then if it gets to the mat, I think he's going to have a hard time submitting Perez or finishing Perez with ground and pound. So I think Dricus du Plessis by decision, getting 3-1 on that. I don't think that's a bad spot to roll the dice. So shout out to you, Paul, my friend. Next up, we've got Big Ben Rothwell taking on Marcin Tybura. Ben came in at 265 and actually looked a little bit better to me. He looks a little bit more filled out. Now, it's hard to tell with these heavyweights because they've got such extra mass on them, but he looked like he has a little bit more muscle built up under there. Marcin Tybura came in at 263. Same old. He's got the big bear belly on the front of him. He's just a big dude. Now, Rothwell seemed like he was a little bit smaller, actually, when they faced off. I kind of thought Rothwell would be the bigger man. One point, though, is you've got to remember Marcin was wearing shoes. So if Marcin takes his shoes off and is barefoot like Ben Rothwell was, they probably size up a little bit more evenly. It's been nothing but love coming in here on Marcin Tybura. He was all the way up at plus 165, which I agree is probably a little bit wide, but now he's down to plus 125 in spots. You can get Ben Rothwell at minus 150. I lean towards Ben Rothwell. I think he's got the power advantage here. I think he's savvy enough on the mat that he's not going to get submitted by Marcin Tybura. And if Marcin tries to stay on the outside and just kind of pick and poke at him, I don't know if the judges are going to like that. We saw last week the referee getting in there and splitting them up when they got on the cage, repeatedly looking for action. And Ben Rothwell's mental state is a big question mark for me. He's in a place that's just absolutely torn apart by the racial injustice and the riots and everything going on in the world right now. And he seems to have taken it really, really personally. It's something that weighs heavily on his heart. And he tried to talk about it at the interviews, or at least the interviewers tried to get him to talk about it, and he kept pulling back. He doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to focus on it. He wants to fight. He wants to get in here and get some separation from it, focus on his opponent and fight. But with those kind of heavy issues, we've seen them weigh on fighters mentally before when they get into the cage. So I don't know that it's something he's fully going to be able to block out. And because of that, it makes it to where I can't bet on him. Now, I do think Ben Rothwell has enough in the tank to win this fight, but unless he fights with a sense of urgency like we saw against Stefan Struve, I don't know that he'll be able to finish Marcin Tybura. And Marcin Tybura does have some durability issues. I've seen a lot of people take Rothwell by knockout in this spot. I actually think Rothwell by decision isn't a half bad prop here. And again, we've got a spot where the total maybe makes a little bit of sense. Over 2.5 at minus 160, you don't have to worry about who actually wins the fight, but as long as it makes it to the judges' scorecards, you cash your ticket. That's not a bad way to go. But again, Ben Rothwell, by decision, I think is kind of an unpopular pick right now, and that's plus 245. I don't think that's a bad spot. I think this might end up being a hairy, close, split decision type of situation, but I think Rothwell hits harder than Tybura does, so he'll score the bigger shots in the fight, even if Tybura does out-volume him, but it really depends on the judges. I don't have the feel on the judges at Fight Island that I used to, because the last fight, it was chaos. It was bananas. We have no clue what they're looking for. We have no clue what they're scoring at this point, and I don't even know if it's the same judges, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of research on that before I take that kind of a spot. But the pick's going to be Ben Rothwell. I like Ben Rothwell by decision as just kind of a little dart throw, but again, I don't know if I'm actually going to make that bet myself. Co-main event time. I'm excited for this one. Edson Barboza taking on Makwan Amirkhani. Edson comes in at 145.5. Just shredded. This guy is so lean. I can't believe he keeps making this 145 weight limit. And honestly, he seemed a little thinner to me. Now, he was a big, thick, muscular guy at 155, but I know he's sucked out right now. I'm going to be curious to see if he blows up like Jose Aldo did the last time out when he rehydrates. Maybe his muscles will reinflate themselves. But he seemed a whole lot thinner this time around than he did last time, which, if anything, that might speak to his strength and conditioning. If he's not lifting quite as much, if he's doing a lot more, high-pace cardio type stuff to make the weight class, if he's losing some of that muscle, that factors, in my opinion, in this fight. Makwan Amirkhani came in at 146, and this dude is stone cold. He looked really good on the scales. He looked locked in, ready to go. I was listening to his interviews. and he talks about how he's essentially cut out the people in his life that were bad distractions for him. He would fight maybe once a year, and then he would go party the rest of the year and then get in fight camp before his next fight. That maybe speaks to why he hasn't improved as much as we would expect to for a kid that's got the talent ceiling that he does. That's all done and gone now. He's cut those people out. He's talked about even cutting family out. He's like, I don't show up at your job and try and distract you. And he says he's not partying anymore. To me, that's huge. He's turning this into a profession. He's getting serious about the fight game. When they faced off, they sized up extremely well. Now, Edson Barboza was not a small man at 155, and coming down to 145 looked huge against Dan Ige. Makwan Amirkhani stood toe-to-toe with this kid for being a natural 145er, for being a guy who's fought at 145 for the majority of his career, if not all of it. He was not smaller than Edson Barboza. It was a very good face-off. Both these men are intense and ready to go. Now, I messed this lineup. I took a shot on Makwan Amirkhani earlier in the week. I put a unit on him at plus 175 because I did not expect the amount of outpouring of love I've seen from Edson Barboza. I think Makwan Amirkhani is totally live to catch a kick, drive this thing to the floor, put this fight on the mat, and then be able to choke out Edson Barboza. On top of that, I know Makwan Amirkhani has got some cardio issues. He's had them in the past, but if he's taking this whole thing a lot more seriously, if he's training full-time as opposed to just training when he's in camp for a fight, I think we're going to see improved cardio. I think we're going to see improved striking. I think we're going to see the birth of Makwan Amirkhani 2.0. Now he's sitting around plus 225, plus 230. I love the dog shot on Makwan Amirkhani here. I'm not sold on Edson Barboza at this point. He's an aging veteran who's looking for life in a new weight class, and that's a fade spot for me. I always look to go against that. I know the Ige fight was very close, very competitive, but this is a different stylistic matchup, and I think Makwan Amirkhani at 2-1 essentially is a live dog here. If you're parlaying Edson Barboza, I'd just say be careful. Main event time, Cory Sandhagen versus Marlon Moraes. When it comes to the weigh-ins, this was actually probably the low point of the evening, which that's kind of frustrating because you always want to end with a peak, right? Magic Marlon Moraes came in at 136 and knew exactly what he was doing. This guy's been around forever, looked good on the scales, big flex, confident looking. Cory Sandhagen, same thing. Both these guys, consummate professionals, been around forever, no issues, gets on the scales, a big smile, looked excited, did the arm spread thing. He's ready to go. He's ready for his moment. When they faced off, obviously Cory was taller and longer. We knew that was coming. And it was a really short, respectful face-off. Both guys kept the masks on. Really not a whole lot for me to read from here. My spot doesn't change. We waited for all the money to come in on Marlon Moraes. We waited for that line to dip as low as it's going to go. And then I hammered Cory Sandhagen. I am on Sandhagen here. I'm sprinkling rounds 3, 4, and 5 for those finishes because the later this fight goes, we've seen Marlon Moraes get weaker and struggle to just stay on his feet because his cardio is that bad. As long as Cory Sandhagen gets out of round 1, this is his fight to lose. Even at minus 140, minus 150, that's where I was planning on taking it earlier in the week. And then I saw the market move. I saw people betting on Moraes. We managed to get down to about that minus 130 range before we hit it. So I still like Cory Sandhagen here. And like I said, Cory Sandhagen inside the distance isn't a bad look either. And I think you're getting plus 180 on that, plus 150, something in that ballpark. I don't think that's a bad shot either because remember, this is a 5-round main event and Marlon Moraes simply can't go 5 rounds in the UFC. We haven't seen him do that in a long time. I see a lot of people picking Cory Sandhagen by decision, and I just don't know how Marlon Moraes makes it that far in this fight because if he's at all in this fight, he's going to have to strike with Cory Sandhagen, who has much more output than Marlon Moraes is and a significant reach advantage. So he's going to have to explode. He's going to have to work hard to close that distance, or he's going to have to explode and use that muscle to get a takedown. If he does any of those things, I think he's got to end the fight before round 3. So if we get to round 4, if we get to round 5, I think it's going to be Cory just pouring it on. And unless we get some kind of strange let them die in the cage situation like we did with Jose Aldo when he challenged Peter Yan for the title, I expect Cory Sandhagen to get a knockout here. Them's the reads, folks. Keep an eye over at Die Hard MMA Pod on Twitter. That's, again, where I tweet all of my official action. So if I give you a prediction, but I haven't put my money where my mouth is yet, don't necessarily think of that as gospel, because if I don't believe in it enough to actually bet on it, and make your own choices, of course, obviously. If you think it's good enough to bet on it, then go for it, and I wish you luck. But, yeah, My reads are my reads, and my bets are my bets. They are two very different things. So give me a follow. Make sure you know what I'm actually betting on for this card. We've recapped the entire thing top to bottom. This one's going to be a banger. This is going to be an absolute banger of an event. I see lots of finishes. I see lots of brawls, lots of back and forth fights, and I see lots of really wide lines. I think some of these favorites should not be as big of favorites as they are for sure. Good luck, everybody. I hope you do nothing but cash tickets, and let's roll.